What's up, Covalence friends? Today, we're going to be extending type definitions in TypeScript from third-party libraries. I'm going to go ahead and show you a very common case used in Express, and the way that they set it up makes it very easy for interface merging. And then I'm going to show you a not so common case. It's actually a totally custom value, and it'll work for basically any library out there. So let's get right into it. All right, so we're starting with our Express template, and I've already installed our node modules, and we're pretty much ready to go. I renamed the repo as well to just typing extension. But what we can do is normally, we'd pop in here and we can configure this app, and you can actually build this pretty much a generic Express app with a CRUD API. And so we have our API at /API, which is right here. And then we have a users area right here, right? And so basically API v1 uses a route called users, and then we have a separate users file in here that defines our function. So we define our get route, we define our post route, etc. So if we wanted to actually come in here and we wanted to grab something like, request.user, so we can say, let user equals request.user, we don't actually have anything defined for request.user. And this is a pretty typical property that's set on things like using passport and those kind of things. So we're not going to go into using passport in this in this video, but we have other videos that use passport, and I guarantee you it's pretty easy to use. I'm sure 90% of you have actually used something like passport, but generally what you do is that you use some sort of a authentication strategy like bearer auth or JWT, and then you parse an access token, and then you put that user object after you fetch the user from the database using that access token. You put that user on request.user. So using request.user is pretty common, and in this particular case, we're going to assume that you've already instantiated some sort of authentication strategy, right? And so we need to actually be able to use request.user. Now, depending on what library you're using, you may actually use a library that automatically does this with its own typings, but we're going to show you exactly how to do it regardless of that, right? So if you're using a library that doesn't have that, we need to be able to actually define this for TypeScript to know what this is, right? So typically I like to have kind of like a separate folder for my typings. And then, so in our typings here, we can just have an index.d.ts. Now you might have multiple files in here. You might have a models.d.ts. You might have something for each individual library. But for this particular case, let's just put our index.d.ts, and we're going to have our interface. You could declare a namespace if you want, but we're not going to worry about it. So we're just going to have our interface iUser, right? And iUser is going to have an ID. It's going to have a first name. Let's just do all lowercase, actually. First name, string, last name, string, and email. All right, so we have our interface iUser here, and we need to actually apply iUser to be the type definition for request.user. Now, if we actually know that based on what we've installed in our dependencies here, we have installed @types/express. Now, sometimes the libraries will define their own types. But in this particular case, we're using two that don't, but @types provides the definition for that. And so for Express in particular, we're going to be able to go into that library and take a look at what's going on. So if we actually reveal our node modules folder and we go into node modules, we'll see all of our node modules. Then we have our @types here, and you can see we have all of these @types defined right now. So if we go into Express and we look at our index.d.ts, let's see if I can zoom this in. All right, you can go in here and you can kind of look and see exactly what's being defined here, right? Now, if you look, we're importing star as core from Express Serve Static Core, right? So we're actually pulling in all the type definitions from this. We're actually pulling everything from body parser, serve static, Express Serve Static Core, and this as well, right? And you can see that basically this is kind of a wrapper file that wraps this core functionality, this core.express functionality, right? And so what we actually want to do is we want to hop out of this file, and we're going to go into @types express serve statics core, and we're going to pop this file open. So if you look in here, you can actually see Express does something very interesting. It declares this global here with a namespace express, right? Now, not every file will do this, but for this particular case, we have our interface request defined here, and you can see that this is actually what they do this so you can extend it, right? So these open interfaces may be extended in an application-specific manner via declaration merging, right? So this is extremely convenient. And this will actually allow us to merge our interfaces, and we'll have the express request object with the ability to also have user on there, right? And so basically, because this is declared on global, we can actually declare this namespace express on global again and have namespaces merge. So we want to actually go back into our index.d.ts, and we are now going to declare our namespace express. Whoops. So you can say namespace express, and then a lot of the times you actually can go ahead and declare it if you want, but it's not a big deal. So we're gonna have namespace express. We may have to declare it, but we'll find out in a second. And then we'll have interface. Whoop, hit the caps lock. Interface request. And on our interface request, we're actually going to have user, and it's going to be of type iUser. All right, and so now you can actually see that the error already went away. So now we actually have our user defined as an iUser. So it's declared as values never read. That's not in a particular error. You'll actually use this user, and you can go ahead and just return user, right? So you're actually going to return request.user here, and you're good to go. So this actually knows that this is of type iUser. So if you wanted to console.log user.email, you can actually see it has all of the types on there, and you're set, right? Now, what happens if, this is a particular thing, you can actually do this with response, request, application, basically everything that we saw, these three here, extremely convenient. But what happens if we don't have, a library that actually does this for you, right? So they make it extremely convenient, but there's always going to be some sort of library that makes things a little bit difficult, right? And so this typically isn't a problem. I'll be honest. I don't run into this too often, but sometimes there is going to be a function or something that you're trying to use and it isn't in at types. Let's just say a new major version of a particular library comes out where they have some sort of extended functionality. So for instance, let's use lusca, right? So let's go ahead and npm I lusca. So we're going to open up a terminal, and we are going to npm I lusca -- save. So lusca is a very common library used for things like CSP, like context security policy, and HSTS. So things that are going to help keep your website secure. So I highly recommend you look into lusca, use it for your website, and use all of the features. Use as many of them as you can and keep your website secure, right? So lusca is very commonly used. Let's just say lusca for whatever instance. Now this is not the case right now. We're not going to worry about it too much. But in our actual configure here, we're going to import star as lusca, or let's just try importing lusca from lusca, right? All right, so we might actually have to, it doesn't know what lusca is, so that means that we actually have to install our types as well. So lusca does not come with its own type definition, so npm I at types / lusca save. All right, so now we actually have types installed as well, so now it actually knows what lusca is. And this is the actual module here that it's looking at, right? And so basically, if we wanted to kind of come in here and we wanted to say, lusca.csp, right? We can see that there's something called lusca.csp options. Now, if we look at what lusca.csp options are, why don't we go ahead and pop open our node modules again. We're going to go to at types. We're going to go to lusca. Hopefully you guys can see this. I know it's probably a little bit small, but Windows only allows me to make things so big. And we're going to pop this back open. So zoom back in. All right, so we have our CSP options right here, right? And so CSP options has this policy, report only, report URI style nuance, script nuance. Now, let's just say there is another functionality called just nuance, right? So we'll just say that in the new version, they come out with some new one that is actually just nonce, right? And so we're going to actually want to apply this property, because if we want to actually use this function, now JavaScript doesn't care, but if we actually try and say, this, it's going to error, right? It's going to say, argument of type object nonce is not assignable parameter of type CSP options, because the property nonce does not exist on that type, right? Now this is a problem. So we actually need to figure out a way to allow TypeScript to see this as being okay while still utilizing all of the same properties, right? So we want to allow policy, let's just say something, and nonce something, right? And so it likes policy, it doesn't like the nonce here, right? Nonce, is it nonce? Don't worry about it. I have no idea what that word even means. But anyway, we are going to, I should know what that means though, so I'll have to look it up. I know it's used in a lot of like financial applications, Braintree, PayPal, all those things. But it's basically a string that allows you to, it's not important. Anyway, it's usually a token of some kind. So we'll just label it as being a token, right? So, but only used once, right? A token that's only supposed to be used once. Anyway, total side note, sorry about that tangent. But we are going to now extend this function to allow us, or it's actually, we're going to extend the interface. We're only going to extend this CSP options interface to allow us to use this string, this additional string. Now, typically what you want to do is we don't have any kind of namespace declared on the global. So I can't actually, it's unfortunately not going to work the same way it did with Express. So if we go into our typings here and we try and do the exact same thing, right? Where I say, namespace lusca. Well, first, let's actually look at how this is defined in here. We have a declared namespace lusca, but it's not declared on global, right? And it's basically essentially private the way that this is defined. So we can't really do anything with this because of the fact that it's not really built, or it's not really written to be extended, unfortunately. And so what we can do is there's something called module merging, I think it's called, or module interpolation, something along those lines. I forget the exact name. If you look at it on TypeScript now, we actually tried to say namespace lusca, and then we said CSP options, interface CSP options. We can't actually just do this, unfortunately, because it still does not know what it's there. Let's make sure we actually spelled this correctly though. So just in case, go back in here, there, right? So if we actually did this, it's unfortunately not going to work. So what we actually have to do is, if you're going to do this kind of like module merging technique, I recommend that you kind of do a separate file for each library that you do this with. It's just, I don't know if you have to do it, but personally, I think it's a best practice, and I think it's just a lot cleaner. So we'll say lusca.d.ts. And in here, what you're actually going to do is you're going to import whatever you want to extend. So in our case, it's going to be the CSP options from lusca. And then you're actually going to declare the module lusca like this. So it's the actual module here that we want to redeclare, right? And so in here, we're actually going to say interface CSP options, and then we're going to define our nonce as a string. And so now this is what we're actually importing. We are overwriting it, but not necessarily overwriting it, we're actually merging it here. And then if we go back into here, we can see that the error has actually gone away. So it knows that this is a string now. It knows that policy is still a string or object or whatever. And everything is merged and beautiful. So you can see that real time, if you said, if this is good in a string or a number, right, we can update this to be a string or a number. If we go back in here and we hover over this, it now knows that it's a string or a number. So extremely easy, extremely awesome way to do this. And it can work with any library essentially. And basically now, like the way that you did this, you can do this even with modules like this as well. So if you wanted to overwrite something in a particular file, if you're working on a large team, you could actually extend that particular file, whatever's been exported from it interface-wise, and then you can add something to that interface. Now, I wouldn't recommend you do that too often, or you only use it in extreme, limited circumstances, just so that things don't get, a little convoluted, right? So if you're working on a team on a particular project, like you probably should never have to do this, but if it is coming from a third-party library, there are definitely times where I feel like something might happen where you will need this. But something like I did here is usually just kind of like a temporary patch. Realistically, the @types definition should be updated, and you know what, contribute to some like open source software, you know, put in a pull request and get it updated, and you won't need to actually do this. But when you need to actually get your code running and you need everything, you know, going to production, sometimes this is a great little patch. And, you know, very occasionally, sometimes, you know, libraries won't respond to you and you can't get something updated. And so you have to just kind of go on with your own stuff. So this is how you would do it, and hope you enjoyed. All right, so I hope that was easy enough to understand. Like I said, I pretty much covered 2 common cases there, and one being completely custom that should work for basically any library. So try it out. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Please, please, please make sure you subscribe, and definitely let us know if there's any additional content you want us to create. Check out our merch store, and hope to see you guys soon.